Hey guys, today we are going to learn how to make this, which is a gelatin based texture plate. I'm going to show you several different textures and lots of different ways to get your own patterns and textures in your gelatin plates. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and if you do, please leave a like and make sure you hit that subscribe button. All right, guys, let's get started. Hey guys, let's just jump right in and get started. I'm gonna let you know everything that you need to have to make our textured gelatin plates. We'll start with the gelatin part. To make our gelatin concoction, you will need some sort of container. This is a Pyrex measuring cup. It has a 4-cup capacity. Yours doesn't need to be this large. You could probably get away with a 2-cup capacity. That should be fine. What it does need to be is microwave safe. Here we have some measuring cups. I have a 1/2 cup and a full cup. You will need some gelatin powder. This is Knox unflavored gelatin. I have it in this container like this, but you might have this because I think this is how they sell it in a lot of grocery stores. The measurement is 1/2 cup of gelatin, so that equates to about 8 packets of the Knox in this form. You will need some glycerin, 1 cup of glycerin. This is Crafter's Choice glycerin. Obviously, you can use any brand that you have available to you. And you will need a cup also of boiling water, which I have going back behind me on the stove. These things are optional, but I recommend them. Some stir sticks. I find that working with this sort of concoction is very messy. I don't like trying to clean it off of my utensils afterwards, so I use these craft sticks because we're going to be stirring it. And some paper towels because, again, I don't like using my real towels to wipe up any of this gelatin mess because it is hard to get off once it dries. And that's the gelatin part. Okay, so for the texture, you can use any of an assortment of items. The main plate that I'm going to be showing you that we're going to make from scratch, I'm going to make using this piece of textural material. I mean, this is some exclusive stuff here, and I got it at the department store because it is a bath mat. I mean, that's just what it is. It's an old bath mat, and I cut it up, and we're going to use it to make our textured plate. Now, what I'm also going to show you guys today is how to make one from scratch, but also how to break one up, melt it down, reconstitute it, and make it from an older plate that you may have made previously. Now, when I do that, I'm going to show you guys how to use textures that you might have around the house. This is a piece of a placemat. There's some mesh, another piece of a placemat. This is corrugated cardstock, some embossed paper. I mean, anything that has a raised texture, you can try this technique with. Now, I don't know if all of these are going to work. I mean, we're going to be trying some of these out for the first time together. So you just got to play with it. You got to see what works and see what doesn't work. But generally speaking, anything with any sort of texture, raised texture that you can feel will more than likely work for this technique. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing I'm going to do is take my measuring container and pour out the gelatin. I'm sorry, I said gelatin, not gelatin. Pour out the glycerin. Now, like I said, you will need 1 cup of glycerin, so I'm just going to pour until I get to the 1 cup line, which you probably cannot see, but you gotta trust me. Okay. That is right where it should be. And now what you want to do is get your gelatin powder ready. As I mentioned before, it is a 1/2 cup of gelatin powder. Now there are several recipes on how to make stuff like this on YouTube, on the internet, and most of them use less gelatin than this. But I have not found that that works the best for me. I like a firmer plate because the gel plates that you buy in the store, they are firmer. They have a bouncier sort of texture and a firmness to them. And I find that this recipe I'm going to give you guys today will produce a gel plate that is less floppy and a little firmer in texture. So I'm just going to measure out 1/2 cup of gelatin powder. If you are using the packets, you need 8 of them, as I mentioned. Now this container is, the same as this one. This one's empty and the label fell off of this one. So it's all the same Knox unflavored gelatin. Now if you're using a different brand, I'm not familiar with a brand other than Knox. And I know that this Knox gelatin will have a slightly yellow tinge to it. And that is, just how it looks. If you're using a different brand, it might not look that way. Okay, so the order of operations here is important. You want to do the glycerin first. If you do the gelatin first or the water first, it will produce vastly different results, I have found. And not good ones, bad ones, bad results. You don't want the gelatin to be gloopy or gloppy or in balls. And I found that doing the hot water first produces these blobs that are just impenetrable. Like I could never get them to go away. So this is the way, through lots and lots of practice, I have found works best. You just want to slowly stir in the gelatin powder into the glycerin. Like this is not going to dissolve. It won't dissolve in this substance. It won't. But it can be stirred in very well, and that's what you want to do. You just want to get it stirred in. You don't want any blobs or large pockets of powder. Just slowly pour it into your glycerin and get it stirred in. Okay, I have gotten all of the gelatin stirred in. Before I go in with the hot water, because once you put the hot water in, you are on the clock. Like you don't have a lot of time to waste because then it starts to set up. So before I do that, I wanted to tell you guys a couple things that I left off of the materials list. You're also going to need, obviously, some sort of container to put the gelatin in. This is a baking mat. It is a baking pan. I mean, it is about 8 by 10 size, and it's a little dirty. I'll clean it up before I pour anything into it. And this is optional, but I found that isopropyl helps to spritz the plate with if it has bubbles once you pour it into here. So we will get to that once we're ready to pour. So I have my glycerin and gelatin mixture here. I am going to go over and get the boiling water. You could use this 1 cup, that'll work just fine because you need 1 cup of boiling water. I'm not going to, I'm just going to use a separate measuring cup just because of the setup of how I'm recording this video. But I didn't mention this extra measuring cup when I gave you all of the materials either, but you could use that, like I said. Be right back. Okay, so I have the boiling water ready, and once you put this in, it will start to do its reaction immediately. So what you want to do is just keep stirring it. I have this over here so that it doesn't kind of cloud up my camera lens, but I'm just pouring it in, and while you're pouring, you're just going to keep stirring it. It's just 1 cup of boiling water. Okay. And you just want to stir, I'd say, for about 90 seconds. Okay, so the next step is to take this to a microwave and do 30 seconds on high power. Now I have an 1800 watt microwave. If yours is a smaller power, then you could adjust it as you see fit, but your goal is to just make sure that the gelatin dissolves nicely and the whole thing stays hot enough so that it doesn't start to set up in the container. So you're going to do the 30 seconds times 3. So 90 seconds total in 30-second increments, and in between the 30-second time slots, you want to be stirring it. So 30 seconds in microwave, take it out, stir, stir, stir for about 30 seconds, I would say. Put it back, 30 seconds, repeat, times 3. Okay, so I'm going to take this over to my microwave and I will be right back. Okay, so I have done a microwaving for 90 seconds total. I've been stirring it, and your concoction might have a little foam on the top, as mine does. That is normal, and we're going to get rid of it if it remains after we pour it into our container. Now, here's my baking sheet. Like I said, it is approximately 8 by 10, I believe, or maybe it's closer to 8.5 by 10, but I'm just going to pour this directly in here. It's important that whatever container you use not have a texture on the bottom, unless you want a texture on the bottom, that'd be flat without any bevels or like lips or indentations. This has a 1-inch depth. It's not necessary for it to be that deep, but you do want something that can hold all of the liquid that you're going to pour in. This is approximately almost 2 1/4 cups, and I'm just going to go ahead and pour it in. You don't want it setting up in the measuring cup. So I'm just going to go ahead and pour all of this in. I think we'll end up with a plate that is just the thickness that I would like it to be. I aim for about 1/2 inch. I'm not sure if this one will get there, but we'll see. Okay, so we have this. I don't know if you can see some swirls. Let me turn this light off. If you can see like swirls of the foam in there, that's what the isopropyl is for. If you spray the isopropyl, it'll break up those sudsy swirls and any bubbles that you may have. Now, I didn't mention this before, but when you're doing your stirring, you don't want to be too aggressive with it because it can produce bubbles. But if you end up with some bubbles in your mixture, by the time you get to this point, spritzing the isopropyl on there will take care of those, generally speaking. Now, I don't know, you might be able to just spritz water if you don't have isopropyl. I don't know, I've never tried that, but I know for sure that the isopropyl works. Okay, so what you end up with should be something that is smooth, that is relatively clear. I mean, it has a yellow tint to it. You can't really tell in this pan, but by clear, I mean there shouldn't be things floating in it. If you have hard nodules or what have you, you can fish those out before the thing sets up because they will remain there. They're not going anywhere if you have something floating inside of it. So what we're going to do is come back in about 15 minutes and see how much this has set up. You want to place the texture in at a point where it's not liquid. It's not still liquid. Right now it's still liquid. But you don't want it to have set up too much because then it won't take the texture. So I'm going to come back in about 15 minutes and see what kind of texture this has at that point. So I'm gonna put this off to the side. And while that 15 minutes is going, I'm going to show you guys how to break down a gel plate and reconstitute it to make a new one. Be right back. Okay guys, I'm back. So what I have here is a DIY gel plate that I made myself. The texture that I was trying to put in it here and here didn't really work out that well, so I'm just going to break this up, melt it down, and reconstitute it to make a new plate. So I can just rip this up. You know, it will rip if you pull hard enough, but I also wanted to show you guys how easy it is to cut these plates as well. So I have a sharp knife here, chopping style, I suppose. Just go in with a knife like you were cutting, you know, any sort of food product, and it just slices right up. Now, if you tried this with the commercial plates that you get online at the stores, it would not work at all. Like, those plates are not designed to be cut this easily, which is a good thing. I mean, if you spend that kind of money or something, even though, you know, they're pretty affordable, but still, if you spend money on something, you don't want it to be so easily, you know, cut up. You know, if you drop some scissors on it or something, you don't want it so easily punctured or potentially ruined. But these DIY plates, even though they do have a good structure, you know, they're not floppy, they have some substance to them, they are much easier to cut. And like I said, although you can rip these, we're going to be putting them back here in the container I showed you guys before. So you might want to just, if you have one that you want to recycle, you might want to chop it into sizable enough pieces so that it will fit in the container you're going to use to melt it down. Again, because we're going to be melting this in the microwave, you want to make sure that whatever you put it in is microwave safe. So you can just cut up the old plates. I mean, that is the great thing about them. When you make them yourself, when you get done, or if you're over the texture plate that you made, like you don't like how the texture came out, or you just aren't going to use it anymore, you can cut it right down and put it back in the microwave and make a new one. Now this one I had used, and it did have acrylic paint on it. I tried to clean the acrylic paint off, but I have several that still have plenty of paint on them, and I'm still able to melt those down, but they're not going to be the Knox yellow, which is what I would call this kind of yellow, transparent yellowish color. If you leave acrylic paint on, you should try to clean it off as much as possible, because, you know, it's acrylic paint and you're putting it in the microwave. I don't know that that is harmful per se, because I've never had anything harmful come of that, but still, it's acrylic paint. I don't think it's supposed to be microwavable, so if you can clean it off as much as possible, go ahead and do that. I have definitely made ones where there was plenty of paint that I was not able to get off, and it turned out fine. Use your own judgment. But this is a fairly big plate. I am filling up my container here, and that is fine. I'm just going to put this in the microwave, and I'm going to do that same 30-second intervals that we did making the one from scratch. So you're going to melt it down in 30 seconds at a time. So put it on 30 seconds on high, and it's going to melt some. It's not going to melt all in one shot. With an amount this big, I'm going to need more than 3 intervals to melt this down. I'm not sure how many I'll need, but it's going to be more than 3. If you have a smaller plate that you're repurposing, you might be able to get it done in 3 intervals. I mean, you'll be able to tell. It will melt completely back down to a liquid substance that you can pour out again. So that is the goal. If there's still bits and bobs of it floating around in the liquid, then you're not done yet and you need to keep going. So I'm gonna get my craft stick so I can stir, and in between the 30-second intervals, I might stir it, I might not. It's helpful to stir it to see if there's anything still floating in there, because sometimes you can't tell. But once you're done, you definitely want to get it all stirred up. So I'm going to take my sticks with me and get this melted down, and I'll be back. Okay, so I have melted down that plate, and as you can see, it does have a green tinge to it, which doesn't bother me. I was using blue paint on this plate, and although it looked clean, I thought it cleaned it off. There was paint still in the grooves and textures, I guess. This doesn't bother me a bit. If it bothers you, then you might want to try to get it a little more clean than I did. I'm not sure. But this is another baking pan. I think this one is 11 by 13. This is 3 cups of liquid. Just going to go ahead and pour this in like I did the other one. And that should be a good thickness for this plate. Now, it needs to set up just like the other one did. So we're going to give this one about 15 minutes before we come back and try to put some texture in it. In the meantime, I do want to give it a spray. I see some bubbles there. And I do see a fleck of acrylic paint here. Now, you might see some here or there. If they're small, I don't bother with them. That one looked kind of large, so it's pretty easy to fish out. One, you know, of course, the plate still has to be in liquid form to fish things out. Once it starts to set up, you're kind of out of luck with that. So again, I'm going to give this about 15 minutes before we come back, see what kind of state it's in and if it's ready to have the texture inserted. In the meantime, I'm going to grab the one that we worked on from scratch, bring it in and see if it's ready. Okay, so this is the one that we made from scratch. It's been sitting off to the side for about 16 or 17 minutes. There's no super precise way to describe the, the state of setup you want it to be in before you can put something in it safely. Obviously, you don't want it to still be running. If you turn it this way and turn it that way and it moves, then it's still in a pretty liquid form and it's not ready to take a texture yet. You can touch it as well, and that is probably the consistency you want. It's sticking to my finger like it wants to come off of my finger, but it doesn't. So I think this is a perfect place. I don't know whether you guys could see that. I'll do it again. You saw the concoction pull up as if it wants to come off on my finger, which means it's still in a fairly liquid form. It is moving a bit. I moved it a little too much there. It will move a bit if you turn it, but it's not yet completely set up. Okay, so what I'm going to do is take our texture. I think I moved it a bit too much to where it actually wanted to come out of the plate. That's my bad, but there are a few wrinkles here. That doesn't bother me. So you want to take your texture. This is the texture I'm going to be using, and you just want to place it face down on top of your concoction. Now I cut this to size. You don't want to do any mashing, okay? I am gently tapping. That's it. I'm gently tapping on top of this to make sure it's actually in contact with the gelatin and not, sitting up or that there are bubbles in any particular place. I'm gently tapping, and that is all. If you mash, it will definitely make a wave. I've had plates that had, deep kind of divots in them because I pushed texture in it too hard. Okay, so once that is in there and you feel confident that it's making contact everywhere that you want it to make contact, everywhere you want the texture to transfer, you just put it off to the side and let it set up. Generally, I don't do any less than 3 hours before I pull this back to see what's going on under there. After 3 hours, the texture should be imprinted. I don't think that it's set up enough to use yet, but you can go ahead and pull this off at the 3 hour mark, and I think you should be good to go. Now, can you do less time? Sure. I don't know the number to tell you, just because the gelatin just has to be completely set up enough to where it's holding the texture and that it won't let it go. So that's probably less than 3 hours, but I say to be safe, I give it 3 hours. Put it aside. You can stick it in the refrigerator if you want. That does kind of expedite the setup time, but it also, if you leave it in the fridge, just know, I think the only side effect to that is the plate may shrink a little bit, which is not really a problem. Speaking of the fridge, the reason why we put the glycerin in the mixture was as a preservative. So when you're done with this plate, it doesn't have to go in the refrigerator. It will keep. Like, it is intended to be a permanent plate. If you didn't use the glycerin, then the plate would mold. You can keep it in the fridge, but it would be done in a week or two. You'd have to throw it away, get rid of it, and make a new one. So using the glycerin that we used is a very important step, because it allows us to have a permanent plate that doesn't have to be stored in the refrigerator. I keep mine in the basement, and I've never seen anything mold wise on these plates, and I make a lot of them. The one time I've seen mold is when I did the recipe wrong and I didn't put enough glycerin, and it was moldy within the week for sure. Even though it had a little bit of glycerin, it was definitely moldy very quickly. So you do want to understand that that part of the recipe is very important, and that you can keep the plate out of the refrigerator, stored in your craft space. So we're gonna wait for the second plate to set up and get ready for texture, and I'll be back to show you guys the texture that I place inside of it. Okay guys, we are back to finish up our reconstituted plate. If you guys can see, it's very clean, clear, looks like it's ready to go. I touched it and it seems like it wants to stick to my finger and come out. That is a good indication that it will accept texture at this time. So I'm just going to do a bunch of different things in this one. I have a rubbing plate, you know, a children's rubbing plate. I mean, I shouldn't say children's, because to be honest, it's mine, it belongs to me. I use it in mixed media, but I'm going to put it on the side that has the larger holes. I mean, this side has paint on it. See, I used it. One side is embossed and one side is debossed. I'm not sure which is which. I should probably know, but I want to put this side that has the leaves pushed out. I'm going to put that in. I'm going to start up here. And just want to make sure, like the last one, that every part of this has good contact with the gelatin. Now, I can almost guarantee that there are going to be air bubbles in here, because with a solid plastic substance like this, you are guaranteed to be trapping air bubbles when you put it down like this. But that doesn't really bother me. I mean, if it bothers you, you might want to try to put it down a little more carefully than I did. I just kind of plopped it. If you put it down slowly and carefully, you might be able to avoid so many air bubbles, but it's just something you're gonna have to accept with a full sheet of plastic like this. Now I'm going to, this is a piece of a placemat that has paint on it. I'm going to go ahead and put that down here. It is overlapping with the other thing, but that doesn't bother me. You just, again, want to make sure that every area has good contact. Just especially the corners. I mean, obviously it's not contacting here where it's overlapping with the other piece, but you just want to make sure everything that can contact the plate is. And for these little sections here, I have a piece of a, what is this? This is a bottle mat. Like, you know, when your kids have bottles, we had a drying mat for them because I was washing them by hand for some reason, even though I had a dishwasher. I don't know. I didn't know what I was doing. But I had a drying mat here, and I'm just going to turn this face down to get that pattern pushed in. And we have a little sliver here that won't have any texture on it. It doesn't matter. You saw how easily I was able to cut the mat up. So you can cut this into however many pieces you want it to be once it is all set up. And this is just a piece of embossed paper. I'm not sure how this is going to work, but we're going to try it. Okay, so that's that. Melting it down and reconstituting it into a new plate works exactly the same as starting from scratch as far as applying the texture. And we're gonna let these set up for a few hours. I'm actually gonna go ahead and melt down a few more that I have over there on the side. I have a bunch available to be melted down, and when we come back I will have a bunch of textured surfaces to show you guys. So I'll see you then. Okay, so I'm back, guys, and I'm ready for the big reveals. So I can already tell that at least one of these did not work out, and that's fine. You know, that's why I had so many that I could melt down and reconstitute, because sometimes it just doesn't work out, or you get tired of it, or you know, what have you. But let's start with our main one. This is the one that we made from scratch. Let me make sure that you guys can see everything closely. This is the one we made from scratch, and this is the one that has a texture of this lovely bath mat. So let's pull it off and see how it did. That's perfect, right? Like, that is some, and that's in there. Like, that is some very good texture we have. Like, that bath mat was very good for transferring texture. So now you want to just get something that you can dig out the corner of the mold with, so it'll loosen itself up. I have non-stick baking pans, so this part is easy. That's why I would recommend using baking pans. They're nice and flat, but they're also easy to get everything out. So look at that. It's kind of hard to see. Let me get a piece of paper. I mean, with this white behind it, you can definitely see that the Knox is yellow in hue, but I hope you guys can see all the great detail in that texture plate. And for me, the very best thing about these texture plates is that if you don't want to do texture, you can turn it over and just have a flat plate. Like, even though you are seeing texture, the back of it is flat, like there's nothing there. So you can use this as the flat side, flip it over, and get some nice texture going in your gel prints. And this is thick, it's pretty sturdy, it has a nice buoyancy to it. I'm happy with this. So the next one that we did was the one that I melted down, right? And I re-poured it into this container and did several different varieties of texture. Now, this is the one that I said I knew for sure that hadn't worked. I don't know if you get, it worked somewhat, but I was way too gentle with this one. I should have, this is a very lightweight piece of fabric foam, and I should have pressed it down a lot more aggressively than I did. I was being very gentle and tip tapping, and I should have pressed it down harder. I think it will work, and I like actually the texture that this thing has, so maybe I'll try it again. This one I'd never tried before. It's just a piece of textured scrap paper, and I don't know if you guys can see that. I'll turn it towards the light. I mean, that transferred really well. That's a great texture there. This one is our placemat. That's excellent also. And this final one was the rubbing plate. And you know what? That's better than I thought it would be. I was afraid that there would be too many air bubbles under there. And there are some, like there's one here. And there's some flat divots here where I know that those were air bubbles, but it's not as many as I thought it would be. I definitely think that that will work. And so how I would do this is I would just trim this up. With these, because they're all different shapes and sizes, I would just cut them into their respective shapes and use them that way. Now, I did some more off camera because I had more plates to melt down. So you're going to be seeing me reveal stuff live here that I have no idea whether it worked or not. This was a Dollar Tree doily that I cut down to fit into this round 9-inch baking pan. So let's pull it up and see how it turned out. Huh. I mean, it doesn't look great, but it definitely looked like it took that texture. And I'm really going to be interested to see what this looks like once it's printed on top of. It definitely has a lot of texture, so I'm interested to see this one, what it looks like when it gets printed on. Let me pull it out. I want to get a closer look. That's cool. I mean, it didn't transfer cleanly. I see places where it could have been pressed down more. I mean, that one was a hard one to make sure it had great contact, because every time I pushed it down, I'd get my fingers in the gelatin, and I wasn't interested in doing that. So, I would give that one a B-. Okay, now there's this one. Now let's see. All of these, with the exception of this, were done with paper. So I'm really very interested to see how these paper products held up when pressed down in this liquid substance. So this one was, oh boy. This is not looking like it went well. No, that one didn't work out. Yep, you win some, you lose some. I feel like this is going to go the same way. I feared that this might happen, but you know, you never know until you try, right? Anyway, let's look at this one. Wow. Well, that one's not bad. I mean, I did that with just a piece of paper that I had put modeling paste through a stencil onto the paper, and then I pressed it down here. That's not bad. This might redeem this pen. And this one was just the burlap ribbon texture. That's a little suspect, that one there. But you never know. And I have a second round pan here that I put a placemat on top of. Oh, the whole thing wants to come up. Okay. Now see, this placemat had paint on top of it, as you can see. And though that texture did transfer fairly well, there's a lot of air bubbles in this one. Like, there's a lot of air bubbles there. That one might get melted down again. And finally, we have this tray, which is just 3 different placemat pieces. So let's pull this one up. That one was overlapping this one, but it does look like that texture transferred very well. Next, that looks good as well. And the final one. Perfect. This tray came out really well. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a couple of them prepped to use, and we'll see how they work. So these paper ones that I kind of decided to scrap, I tried spraying some water on them to see if I could get the paper to peel up, and lo and behold, it actually worked on this side. I don't know if you can see the corrugated cardboard texture there, but it worked on this side. So I'm going to work on this side. I'm just spraying it like this with some water and rolling it and seeing if it'll come up cleanly. Let's see if I can get this up, and hopefully we can still put these to use. So I'm going to work on this and I'll be back.